The afternoon sun painted the lawns on Willow Ridge Lane a bright, cheerful green. It was the kind of street where people took pride in their flower beds, and the silence was broken only by the distant hum of a lawnmower or the laughter of kids before dinner. Maya had always thought places like this existed only in movies. Standing on the driveway of her aunt's tidy brick house, she took a deep breath of the clean, safe-smelling air. At 20, moving here to be closer to campus felt like a fresh start, a quiet place to focus on her nursing degree. Her aunt, a warm woman with a smile that reached her eyes, was already inside unpacking kitchen boxes. Maya decided to start with the porch, figuring the neighbors might see her and come say hello. She was right. A man from across the street, walking a cheerful-looking golden retriever, gave a friendly wave. "New to the block?" He called out. "Yes, sir." "Just moved in with my aunt," Maya replied, her voice naturally polite. "Welcome. I'm 2 doors down. Let us know if you need anything," he said before moving on. It felt nice, normal. A few minutes later, a woman from the house next door came out to get her mail. She had kind wrinkles around her eyes. "Oh, hello there. I saw the moving truck yesterday. I'm so glad someone's finally in this place. I'm just next door. You need a cup of sugar. You come right over, all right?" Maya thanked her, feeling the tight knot of first-day nerves begin to loosen. Maybe this would work out perfectly. From her living room window at house number 42, Deborah Henderson watched this unfold. She'd been the first to buy on this cul-de-sac 23 years ago. She knew everything about everyone, or at least she liked to think she did. She saw the friendly waves, saw the young black girl smiling on the porch. Her lips tightened into a thin line. "Frank, come look at this," she said to her husband, a broad-shouldered man in a police department t-shirt reading the newspaper. Frank Henderson, a sergeant with 28 years on the force, sighed and put the paper down. He knew that tone. "What is it, Deb?" "New people at the Johnson house. I told you I saw a rental sign go up a while back. Looks like they've arrived." Frank glanced out. "So? Nice to have a full street again. You didn't see the car they had out front yesterday. An old Honda with a bumper sticker. And now it's just a young girl. Probably a student. Renters, Frank. You know what that does to property values. And a young one, alone all day. Who knows what kind of activity that brings?" Frank went back to his paper. He'd heard this song before. Deborah's neighborhood watch was less an official duty and more a personal mission to maintain what she saw as the street's perfect character. To her, activity was a specific word. It meant noise, mess, strange cars, trouble. And in her mind, trouble had a certain look. She watched Maya a moment longer, then her eyes narrowed. The girl was looking at her phone, laughing, probably telling her friends about the big house she'd managed to sneak into. Deborah thought. The rest of the week passed calmly for Maya. She settled into her new room, figured out her bus route to campus, and enjoyed the peace. Her aunt worked long hours as a hospital administrator, so Maya often had the house to herself in the afternoons. She loved to sit on the porch steps with a textbook, the dappled sunlight through the oak tree making patterns on the pages. On Friday, her friend from college drove over. His name was Leo, and he was dropping off some class notes she'd missed. He pulled up in his slightly beat-up sedan, the one with the chipped paint and the band sticker on the back window. He didn't even get out, just rolled down the passenger window, music playing softly from his speakers. Just some jazz, nothing loud. "Hey, future nurse. Brought your lifeline," he said, handing over a folder. "Maya!" "You're a saint," she laughed, leaning in the window. They chatted for maybe 3 minutes about an upcoming test. Leo made a silly joke, and Maya's loud, happy laugh echoed in the quiet street. The front door of number 42 swung open like it had been spring-loaded. Deborah Henderson marched down her walkway, her stride stiff and purposeful. She stopped on the sidewalk, arms crossed, directly in Maya and Leo's line of sight. The friendly chatter died instantly. Maya straightened up. "Hello," she said, her voice friendly but cautious. Deborah didn't return the greeting. Her eyes scanned Leo's car, lingering on the sticker, the rust near the wheel well. She looked at Maya, then back at Leo. "Is there a problem?" Leo asked, his voice calm. "This is a private residential street," Deborah stated, her voice cold and sharp. "Not a parking lot for loitering. We have rules about noise and strange vehicles here." Maya felt a flush of confusion and embarrassment. "Oh, he's just dropping off notes. He's leaving right now. I don't know what you're used to where you come from," Deborah continued, as if Maya hadn't spoken. "But we keep things orderly here. This kind of activity attracts the wrong attention." The word activity hung in the air. Leo's face hardened. "Ma'am, I'm just dropping off schoolwork. The music is off now. We're not causing any trouble." Deborah's hand came out of her pocket holding her phone. She pointed it not at Leo's car, but directly at Maya's face. The soft click-whir of a digital shutter was shockingly loud in the silence. "What are you doing?" Maya asked, taking a step back, her heart starting to thud. "Documenting," Deborah said flatly. "For the neighborhood association. And for the police, if it comes to that. I know your type. You think because you're in a nice house, you can do what you want. It doesn't work that way here." Her gaze was like ice. "He needs to leave, now, and you need to understand the rules." For a moment, Maya was frozen. The unfairness of it was a physical blow. She'd been smiling on her porch 3 minutes ago. Now she felt like a criminal being photographed in a lineup. Leo, seeing the shock on her face, decided not to escalate. "It's cool, Maya. I'm gone. Call me later." He gave Deborah one last, long look, then slowly pulled away from the curb. Deborah lowered her phone, a look of cold satisfaction on her face. She didn't say another word to Maya. She just turned and walked back to her house, her back rigid, and closed the door firmly behind her. Maya stood alone on the driveway. The sun still shone. The birds still chirped, but the peace of Willow Ridge Lane was shattered. She felt exposed, watched, and branded. Her hands were trembling slightly as she picked up her forgotten textbook from the steps. The kind neighbor lady chose that moment to come outside to water her flowers. She gave Maya a sympathetic, worried smile and a little shake of her head, as if to say, "Don't mind her." But the damage was done. Inside, Maya found her aunt in the kitchen. The words tumbled out, the sudden confrontation, the accusation, the phone pointed in her face. Her aunt listened, her expression growing from concern to deep anger. She put a steadying hand on Maya's shoulder. "That's Deborah Henderson," she said, her voice low. "Her husband's a police sergeant. She thinks she owns the street. You listen to me, baby. You have every right to be here. This is your home. But from now on, you be careful. You don't give her a reason. Keep your phone charged and with you. And if she ever approaches you like that again, you come get me, or you start recording her right back. Understood?" Maya nodded, the warmth of her aunt's hand a comfort against the cold fear settling in her stomach. She looked out the kitchen window at the beautiful, quiet, green street. It didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like a stage, and she was now a player in a game she never wanted to join, with rules she didn't understand, and a neighbor who had already decided she didn't belong. The welcome was over. The tension on Willow Ridge Lane didn't explode after that day on the driveway. Instead, it seeped into the ground like a slow, cold poison. For Maya, the street lost its shine. A simple walk to the mailbox now felt like crossing a border. She could feel the weight of the gaze from the big window of house number 42. She took her aunt's advice to heart. Her phone was always in her pocket, charged. She stopped studying on the porch, preferring the safety of her room. The injustice of it burned, having to hide in what was supposed to be her own home. Inside that house, the poison was brewing into an obsession. Deborah Henderson couldn't let it go. The image of the girl laughing by that beat-up car played on a loop in her mind. It was proof, she felt, of everything she feared. She began her research, which meant watching. She noted the times Maya came and went. She saw the aunt leaving for work early. She saw a different friend, a young woman with brightly colored braids, visit one afternoon for just 20 minutes. To Deborah, this wasn't a social call. It was a pattern. One evening, as Frank Henderson polished his duty boots at the kitchen table, Deborah laid out her case. "It's getting worse over there, Frank." Frank sighed, not looking up from the buffing cloth. "What is, Deb?" "The activity. The Johnson house. It's a revolving door. Different cars, short visits. That girl is quiet, sure, but it's the wrong kind of quiet. She's sneaky. And the aunt is never home. It's the perfect setup. Setup for what?" Frank asked, his voice tired. He'd had a long shift dealing with real calls, real problems. "For whatever they're doing," Deborah insisted, her voice rising. "I'm telling you, it feels wrong. I saw a young man go around back yesterday. He was only there a minute. What does that sound like to you?" Frank paused his polishing. 28 years on the force had trained him to hear certain phrases in a certain way. Around back for a minute could mean a lot of things, and in his world it rarely meant anything good. His professional mind, weary and cynical, began to connect dots his wife was drawing for him. He trusted her eyes, didn't he? She was the one here all day, keeping watch. Maybe she was onto something. Maybe it wasn't just her usual fussing this time. "Did you get a plate?" he asked, his tone shifting to something more official. "Not that time. But I will. Someone has to do something before this street goes downhill. You should see the looks I get from her now. Pure defiance." Frank put his boot down. The idea of some kid, some renter, bringing trouble onto his street and disrespecting his wife. It lit a slow-burning fuse in him. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It felt like an incursion. "All right," he said, his voice low. "You see anything concrete, you call me. Not 911. You call my direct line." The concrete thing happened 2 nights later. Deborah was taking her nightly peek through the blinds. She saw Maya's friend with the braids pull up. The friend got out, handed Maya a small, wrapped rectangular package, a birthday present for Maya's cousin, actually, and gave her a quick hug. The visit lasted 90 seconds. But in the dim porch light, through the distorting haze of her own suspicion, Deborah saw a secretive exchange. The small package became something else in her mind. Her heart hammered with a kind of fearful excitement. She called Frank's direct line. He was just off shift, still in his unmarked car, a few minutes from the neighborhood. "Frank, it's happening right now." A handoff. At the front door. It was quick, like they knew they were being watched. "It's exactly what I told you." Frank's fatigue evaporated, replaced by a rush of adrenaline. This was on his street. His home. His wife was witnessing a crime. His professional judgment, clouded by personal bias and his wife's certainty, completely failed him. "I'm 2 minutes out," he said, his voice all cop. "Don't approach. I'll handle it." Maya's friend had just driven off. The package, a cute onesie for her baby cousin, was under her arm. The night air was cool and pleasant. She stood for a moment on her driveway, looking up at the stars, trying to recapture a feeling of peace. She never heard the car approach without headlights, The first she knew of it was the crunch of shoes on gravel behind her, fast and purposeful. She turned, and a large man was right there, closer than anyone should be. He was in a plain gray sweatshirt, but his posture, his stance, screamed authority. Maya Carter? His voice was not a question. It was an accusation. Her breath caught. Yes? Who are you? He flipped open a leather wallet, thrusting a badge, an ID so close to her face she had to lean back. The police shield glinted under the porch light. Sergeant Henderson. Police. I need to see some identification. Right now. Panic, cold and immediate, flooded her system. This was Deborah's husband. He was in her driveway, at night, blocking her path to her door. Why? What's this about? Her voice was trembling. Just produce your ID, please, he said, his tone leaving no room for questions. It was the voice he used on suspects in bad neighborhoods. Fumbling, her hands shaking violently, Maya tried to shift the gift package to get to her back pocket. The wrapped onesie slipped from her grip and thumped softly onto the driveway. Leave that, Frank barked, misinterpreting her movement. Hands where I can see them. Just get the ID. Tears of fright now mixing with confusion, Maya managed to pull out her student ID and her driver's license. He snatched them from her, studying them under a small flashlight. This says you live on Oak Street. You want to explain why you're here? He demanded. That's my old address. I just moved. My aunt lives here. She's inside. Maya's words tumbled over each other. Don't shout, he said coldly. I'm conducting an investigation based on reports of suspicious activity and possible narcotics transactions at this address. Narcotics? The word hit her like a slap. What? No? That's my friend. She brought me a gift. It's right there. She pointed a shaking finger at the package on the ground. I said leave it. Frank's voice rose. He was losing patience. This girl was lying. He was sure of it. Playing the scared, innocent student. He'd seen it 100 times. He moved to step between her and the package. Instinctively, Maya stepped sideways, a desperate move toward the house, toward safety, toward her Aunt. Frank saw it as flight. Stop right there, he commanded, and his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was like iron, born of years of subduing resistant people. A sharp pain shot up her arm. Let me go. You're hurting me, Maya screamed, pure terror taking over. Her free hand dove into her pocket for her phone. Her aunt's words echoed. Start recording. Frank saw her hand disappear into her pocket. In his world, in the heat of a detention, a hand going into a pocket could mean anything: a weapon, drugs, destroying evidence. He reacted without a millisecond of thought for the context that this was a young woman in a nightgown on her own driveway. He twisted the arm he held, forcing it behind her back, applying a control technique he'd used on street corners 1,000 times. Maya cried out, a sharp sound of pain and shock that shattered the suburban silence. The phone clattered onto the asphalt dot. The front door of number 42 flew open. Deborah stood there, framed by the yellow light. That's right, Frank, she shouted, her voice shrill with vindication. She's been dealing right out of this house. I saw it. Her words were the final seal on the nightmare. Neighbors' porch lights started flicking on. Across the street, a blind was pulled aside. Frank, his blood up, now had his handcuffs out. The metallic click rasp was the most horrifying sound Maya had ever heard. You're being detained for obstruction and resisting. Turn around. He was pushing her toward the curb when the front door of her own house burst open. Her aunt, her face a mask of fury and horror, raced out in her slippers. Get your hands off my niece. What are you doing? She lives here. Stay back, ma'am, Frank yelled, turning his body, still holding Maya. Help! Someone call the real police. Her aunt screamed into the night, her voice raw. She fumbled with her own phone, her hands shaking too. I'm recording this. You're Frank Henderson. I know who you are. From a porch down the street, a calm, older voice cut through the chaos. I already am. The real police are on their way. And my doorbell camera has been recording the whole thing, Sergeant. You might want to think about your next move. It was the man with the golden retriever. He stood on his steps, phone to his ear, his expression grimmed out in that instant. Under the cold white light of his own neighbor's porch lamp, with a sobbing young woman in his grip, and her aunt's phone shining a light on his face, Frank Henderson froze. The red haze of certainty began to dissolve, replaced by a dawning, gut-wrenching cold. He looked at the package on the driveway. He looked at the terrified girl. He heard his wife's voice still echoing from their doorway. He looked at the unblinking green light of the doorbell camera across the street. The world, his world, tilted violently on its axis. He slowly, stiffly, released the handcuff from Maya's wrist. She stumbled forward into her aunt's arms, where she collapsed, shaking with uncontrollable sobs. Frank took a step back, saying nothing. The sirens in the distance were not for the girl. He knew, with a sudden, terrible clarity, that they were now for him. The next 48 hours were a blur of shock, paperwork, and a slow, burning wave of outrage. For Maya, the physical pain in her wrist was nothing compared to the deep, shuddering aftershock that wouldn't leave her body. She sat in her aunt's living room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. The feel of the hard asphalt under her knees, the cold bite of the metal cuff, the blinding panic, it played on a loop behind her eyes. Her aunt rarely left her side, her own face a storm of protective fury and worry. They spoke in quiet, broken sentences at the police station that night. It had been a confusing and humiliating ordeal. The officers who responded, young and clearly uncomfortable, had treated Frank Henderson not as a suspect, but as a fallen colleague. They spoke to him in low tones off to the side. They took Maya's statement with a formality that felt cold. It was her aunt, fierce and unyielding, who demanded a supervisor, who insisted on copies of every report, who refused to let the incident be brushed into a corner as a misunderstanding. They were given a case number and told internal affairs would be in touch. It felt like being given a receipt for a stolen peace of mind. The man with the golden retriever, whose name was Mr. Peterson, came over the next morning. His kind eyes were serious. I've already sent the video to my daughter, he said, handing Maya's aunt a thumb drive with a copy. She works for the local news website. She's horrified. She wanted me to ask your permission. This shouldn't happen to anyone. After a long, quiet talk, Maya and her aunt agreed. The story needed to be seen. Not for revenge, but because hiding it felt like letting them win. The video was released at noon. Mr. Peterson's daughter wrote a careful, factual article. It didn't need sensationalism. The 2-minute clip was enough. There was the dark calm of the street, the unmarked car pulling up. There was Frank Henderson, out of uniform, but moving with clear authority, advancing on a young woman in sleep clothes. The audio was crystal clear, his demanding voice, Maya's frightened questions, the painful cry when he twisted her arm, the chilling snick of the cuffs, Deborah's shouting accusation from the doorway. It ended with Maya crumpling into her aunt's arms. By that evening, it was everywhere. The local news led with it. Suburb sergeant detains neighbor on own property. The article was shared thousands of times. The comments sections filled up, not with the usual neighborhood bickering, but with a tidal wave of national anger. People recognized this story. It was a fear too many families knew. The hashtag Willow Ridge started trending. Strangers shared stories of being profiled, of being made to feel unsafe in their own spaces. Maya's name wasn't released, but she was referred to as the student or the young woman, which somehow made it feel more universal. Inside the Henderson house, a different kind of storm was raging. The phone started ringing mid-morning. First, it was Frank's captain. His voice was like granite. "Henderson, my office. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Bring your union rep. Don't talk to anyone until then." The call lasted less than a minute. Then the landline started. News stations. Local radio. A few calls were angry, spitting curses before hanging up. Frank disconnected it. Then their personal cell phones began to buzz with texts from friends, from fellow officers. Some were short. "Hey man, saw the news, what's going on?" Others were just links to the video with no message at all, which felt worse. Deborah was defiant at first. "It's that camera. They edited it. They're trying to ruin you because you're a good cop." But as the day wore on and the reality of the online fury began to sink in, her certainty cracked. She peeked through a side blind and saw a local news van parked discreetly at the end of the street. She saw neighbors she'd known for years quickly look away when they got their mail, not giving their usual wave. The silence from the street was louder than any shout. Frank sat at the kitchen table, still in the same clothes from the day before. He said nothing. He just stared at his hands. Those hands had done the twisting, had held the cuffs. On the job, in a dangerous situation, those actions had a reason, a protocol. Here, in the cold light of day, watching them on screen, they looked monstrous. He replayed the sequence in his head, trying to find the point where he could have stopped, should have stopped. Was it when his wife called? Was it when he first saw the girl's frightened face? The possible narcotics, Deborah reported, was a wrapped baby gift. The suspicious activity was a friend's 90-second visit. A crushing weight settled in his chest. He hadn't done his job. He had done his wife's bidding. The next day, Frank walked into the precinct. The usual buzz of the squad room died to an unnatural hush. Eyes followed him, but no one met his gaze. Some looks held pity, others a cold disappointment. In the captain's office, the air was thick. The union rep, a weary-looking man, gave Frank a slight, apologetic nod. The captain didn't mince words. He had the internal affairs report already started on his desk. "You're suspended, Frank. Effective immediately. Full pay pending investigation, but your badge and gun, now." "Cap." "I can explain," Frank began. The words sounding hollow even to him. "The video explains it," the captain interrupted, his voice tired. "You were off duty. You acted on an uncorroborated tip from a civilian, your wife, with no independent observation. You approached a resident on her own property with no probable cause for a stop. You escalated to a physical confrontation and attempted detention. You used department-issued equipment in this mess. And your wife is heard alleging a specific crime with zero evidence. Internal Affairs is looking at everything. Your service weapon discharge records, your past stops, the whole 9 yards. There's also going to be a criminal review from the DA's office. You need a lawyer. A good one. Don't come back here until you're summoned." The walk back through the squad room to clean out his locker was the longest of Frank's life. The silence was now a roaring in his ears. He was no longer Sergeant Henderson. He was the guy in the video. That afternoon, Maya and her aunt sat in a quiet, sun-filled office across from a woman named Attorney Wells. She was a civil rights lawyer, older with a calm and steady presence. She listened to their whole story, from the first day on the porch to the terror in the driveway. She watched the video, her expression not changing, but her eyes grew harder. "What do you want?" she finally asked them. Maya looked at her aunt, then down at her own hands. I want to feel safe in my home again. I want to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else on that street or anywhere. Attorney Wells nodded slowly. Then we go forward. We file a formal tort claim against the police department for excessive force, false imprisonment, and violation of civil rights. We also file a separate civil lawsuit against Frank and Deborah Henderson personally for assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and, well, we'll see what else fits. This is about holding them accountable, every link in the chain. It felt overwhelming, but also like the first solid ground Maya had stood on since the attack. It was action, not just fear. As they left the lawyer's office, Maya's phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo, her friend. The link was to a new article. The headline read, "Police Sergeant Suspended, DA Reviewing Charges in Neighborhood Confrontation." She showed her aunt. They didn't celebrate. There was no joy in it. It just felt like a heavy, necessary door had finally slammed shut on one part of the nightmare, trapping the people who started it inside with the consequences. The fallout was no longer just noise on the internet. It had names, it had official stamps, and it had just begun. The following months were a slow, grinding procession through different kinds of rooms. For Maya, they were rooms of quiet support and painful recollection. For the Hendersons, they were rooms of judgment, each one stripping away another layer of the life they had known. It started with the criminal case. The district attorney's office, under intense public scrutiny, filed charges. They were careful, precise, and devastating. Against Frank, assault in the 3rd degree, unlawful imprisonment, and official misconduct. The official misconduct charge was the professional killer. It meant he had abused the authority of his badge for personal reasons. Against Deborah, filing a false police report and conspiracy to commit unlawful imprisonment. Seeing those words on the official court documents made Deborah physically ill. This wasn't a neighborhood spat. It was a criminal docket. Their first lawyer, a gruff man who mostly handled traffic tickets, took one look at the doorbell footage and the internal affairs file and told them to find someone else. "You need a specialist in police misconduct defense," he'd said bluntly. "And it's going to cost you a fortune." They mortgaged a chunk of their remaining retirement savings to hire a stern-faced attorney from the city. He had no warmth, only a cold assessment of their odds. "The video is insurmountable for the false imprisonment and the assault," he told them in his expensive office. "Our goal is to avoid jail time. We plead, we express remorse. We throw you on the mercy of the court." Remorse. Frank sat in that leather chair, feeling hollow. He felt regret, yes, a deep, churning sea of it. But it was tangled with shame, with anger at his own blindness, and a bewildered sense of how fast it had all collapsed. Deborah, sitting stiffly beside him, felt no remorse at all. She felt betrayed by the neighbors, by the system, by the girl, for not just being who Deborah thought she was. Her shame was only for getting caught. While their defense tried to build a wall against the criminal tide, the civil suit advanced like a deliberate flood. Attorney Wells was thorough. Her subpoenas weren't just for the incident. She requested Frank's entire personnel file. And in the dry, typed pages of internal affairs reports, a pattern emerged. It wasn't of brutality, but of a steady, low-grade bias. There were multiple complaints over the years, all from Black or Latino motorists in certain parts of town, all dismissed as unfounded after internal review. The complaints were similar: unnecessary roughness during a pat-down, overly aggressive questioning for minor violations, a sneering tone. One report noted Frank had been given verbal counseling for referring to a predominantly black neighborhood as the zoo over his radio. Stacked together, alongside the video of him detaining his black neighbor, it painted a picture the department could no longer ignore. The police chief, facing a fury that threatened his own job, called a press conference. He announced that after the internal investigation, Frank Henderson's actions were a profound breach of public trust and our departmental values. He stated that Frank had been given the option to resign immediately or face termination. Frank, on the advice of his lawyer, resigned. The news hit the local paper. Suspended sergeant resigns amid mounting scandals. There was no fanfare, no thank you for 28 years of service. Just a single humiliating paragraph. The pension he'd counted on was now in legal jeopardy. The career that defined him was over. The social death on Willow Ridge Lane was complete. The Hendersons became ghosts in their own home. The kind woman next door, who had once offered Maya sugar, now turned her sprinkler system on whenever Deborah tried to work in her garden, forcing her back inside. The annual block party was held without them. They watched from their window as neighbors laughed and grilled food at the cul-de-sac circle, a party they had once organized. Their own adult children, a son and a daughter living out of state, issued a brief, agonizing statement to the press. We are heartbroken by the events that took place. We believe in accountability and justice, and our thoughts are with the young woman and her family during this difficult time. They didn't call. They didn't visit. The silence from their own family was the deepest cut of all. Money began to bleed away. Frank's salary was gone. The legal fees for 2 simultaneous cases, criminal and civil, were astronomical. They drained their savings account and a college fund they'd set up for a grandchild. They took a second mortgage on the house. The walls of their home, once a symbol of their stability, now felt like a prison they were paying a fortune to keep. Finally, the court dates arrived. The criminal case went first. In a packed courtroom, Frank and Deborah stood before a judge who had read everything. Maya, sitting between her aunt and Attorney Wells, did not look at them. She focused on the grain of the wooden table in front of her. The Hendersons. Lawyer entered the pleas as negotiated. Guilty for Frank to the assault and official misconduct. Guilty for Deborah to filing a false report. The conspiracy charge was dropped. The judge, a weary-looking woman, listened to the lawyer's plea for leniency, citing Frank's long service and their clean records. Then she listened to the prosecutor, describe the trauma inflicted on Maya, the abuse of power, the poison injected into a community. The judge spoke clearly. This was not a mistake. It was a series of choices. A choice to harbor suspicion without cause. A choice to wield police authority as a personal tool. A choice to escalate fear instead of seeking facts. She sentenced Frank to a 6-month suspended sentence, 2 years of probation, and 500 hours of community service. Deborah received 3 years of probation and 300 hours of community service. They would not see jail bars, but they would be convicted felons. The word hung in the air. Frank, a felon. As they were processed, fingerprinted like common criminals, the finality of it crushed him. A month later, they sat across a mediation table from Maya, her aunt, and Attorney Wells to settle the civil suit. Frank looked aged a decade. Deborah's defiant glare was gone, replaced by a numb exhaustion. The fight was utterly drained from them. Attorney Wells laid out the numbers. Maya's therapy bills. Her lost wages from the summer job she'd been too anxious to start. The calculated value of her pain and suffering. The punitive damages meant to send a message. The total was a number larger than the remaining equity in their home. Their lawyer, with nothing left to negotiate, advised them to settle. If this goes to a jury with that video, they'll give her the house and everything in it, he said flatly. And so they signed. The settlement transferred the bulk of their remaining assets, including the proceeds from the forced sale of their home on Willow Ridge Lane, to a trust for Maya. It was over. They had lost the case, their life savings, their home, and their standing. All that was left was debt and a profound, echoing emptiness. They had attacked a neighbor to protect their little world, and in doing so, had vaporized it completely. The moving truck wasn't one of the big professional ones. It was a rented, boxy van, the kind you get for a weekend project. It sat in the driveway of 42 Willow Ridge Lane on a bright Tuesday morning, looking out of place against the manicured lawn. A year ago, the scene would have been neighbors coming over to help, offering boxes and cold drinks, sharing stories of the past. Today, there was only silence. The blinds on the nearby houses were drawn. The street was emptied out. Frank Henderson carried the last of the taped-up boxes from the garage, his movements slow and heavy. The probation ankle monitor under his pant leg was something he was used to now, a constant, itchy reminder. He didn't look at the house. He kept his eyes on the concrete, on the wheels of the van. Deborah stood by the passenger door, clutching her purse like a life preserver. She wore large sunglasses that hid her eyes, but her mouth was set in a thin, tight line. The for sale sign, now stamped with a bright red sold, leaned in the flower bed she had once tended with so much pride. They were leaving behind more than a house. They were leaving behind the entire story of their adult lives, the barbecues, the Christmases, the belief that this was their kingdom. The settlement from the civil lawsuit had taken everything. The sale of the house had barely covered the remaining mortgage and realtor fees. The money, what little was left after the lawyers, was gone. They were moving into a small 2-bedroom apartment in a town 30 miles away, a place where the buildings were warm and the streets were noisy. It was all they could afford. Frank loaded the final box and slammed the van's rear door shut. The sound was too loud for the quiet street. He paused, his hand on the cold metal. For a fleeting second, his gaze lifted and swept across the cul-de-sac. He saw the Peterson house, where the camera had been. He saw the kind woman's house next door, her flower boxes now bursting with blooms he knew she'd planted defiantly. He saw the Johnson house. His throat tightened. He had tried, in the crushing loneliness of the last few months, to pinpoint the exact moment it all went wrong. Was it when he got in his car that night? When he listened to Deborah's phone call? Or was it years earlier, in smaller choices, in whispered jokes with partners, in letting a certain kind of suspicion feel like intuition? He would never find the answer. The damage was total. He got into the driver's seat. The engine coughed to life. He didn't look at Deborah. They hadn't really talked in weeks, not about anything that mattered. What was there to say? Their shared project, this home, this street, this life lay in ruins around them, and they were the ones who had swung the wrecking ball. He backed slowly out of the driveway for the last time and drove away without a glance in the rearview mirror. From the front window of her aunt's house, Maya watched them go. She was holding a mug of tea, the warmth seeping into her palms. She felt no victory. She felt a heavy, complicated sadness. The sight of the defeated man and the rigid woman in that rented van wasn't satisfying. It was just sad. It was the sad end to a story that should never have been written. Her healing had been slow. The first few months after the attack, she couldn't sleep. The sound of a car door slamming would make her jump. She saw a therapist every week, a gentle woman who helped her untangle the knots of fear and anger. The settlement money was in a trust, most of it set aside for her future education and the therapy she needed. She hadn't touched it for anything else. It felt tainted, and she wanted her future to be built on her own work, not their ruin. Her aunt came and stood beside her, putting an arm around her shoulders. "It's over, baby," she said softly. "I know," Maya whispered. And in a legal sense, it was. But she knew a part of it would always be with her, a scar of knowing how quickly the world could become unsafe. Life on Willow Ridge Lane had changed, but it had continued. New people had moved into a few houses. There was a young family with twin toddlers in the Peterson house, after he decided to downsize. The neighborhood had held an unofficial welcome picnic in the park, a deliberate effort to rebuild a sense of community that wasn't based on suspicion. Maya had gone. It was awkward at first, but people were kind. They didn't bring up what happened, but their warmth felt like an apology on behalf of the whole street. A few weeks after the Hendersons left, Maya was sitting on the porch steps again with a textbook. The sun was warm on her face. It was the same spot, the same time of day as that first confrontation. She felt a flutter of anxiety, an old ghost, but she breathed through it. She was reclaiming this space, inch by inch. A car pulled up, not Leo's, but a modest sedan. A woman got out, followed by a man carrying a little girl on his shoulders. They were the new owners of 42 Willow Ridge. They looked happy, excited. The woman saw Maya and waved with a bright, open smile. "Hello," she called, walking over. "We're just getting the keys today. I'm your new neighbor." Maya stood up, smiling back. "Hi, welcome. Thank you. This street seems so lovely and quiet. Everyone we've met has been so friendly." The little girl on the man's shoulders giggled, pointing at a squirrel. "It can be," Maya said, and her smile felt more genuine. "It's a good street." The woman leaned in a little, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The realtor said there was some drama with the last owners, but that it was all settled. We're just glad to have a fresh start here." Maya just nodded. A fresh start is good. They chatted for a few more minutes about the best local pizza place before the new family walked up the path to their new front door. The man fumbled with the keys and swung the door open. The little girl squealed with delight as she was carried over the threshold into a house full of light and empty rooms, ready for new memories. Maya sat back down. She looked at the house. The old, heavy energy that had seeped from its windows was gone, replaced by the chaotic, happy noise of a family moving in. The sold sign was gone. The past was literally being packed away and replaced. She picked up her textbook. She was studying for her nursing finals. The chapter was on trauma care, how to assess a patient, how to be calm, how to help. She found she read it with a new understanding. She knew what fear felt like in a patient's eyes. She knew the importance of a calm, trustworthy presence. Her own experience, as awful as it was, had given her a resolve she didn't have before. She wanted to be that person for others, the one who helped, who healed, who saw a person in pain, not a problem or a stereotype. Down the street, the new father was now pushing his little girl on a swing he just hung from the old oak tree. Her laughter floated on the breeze. In the kitchen of her aunt's house, Maya could hear the comforting sound of pots and pans. Dinner being started. The story of that year on Willow Ridge Lane was now two stories. One was a story of loss, of a world shattered by prejudice and fear, ending in a rented van driving away to a small, anonymous apartment. The other story was one of painful recovery, of a community mending, of a young woman finding a stronger sense of purpose, and of a house with a dark history being given, at last, a happy, noisy, ordinary future. Maya took a deep breath of the clean, safe-smelling air. It felt like her own again. She turned the page and kept reading.